John Ball joining us from Phoenix, Arizona. So John, we've been over the last months, what started with a concept of, can we really do a highly valuable and highly scalable functional strength program for our athletes, the purple patch athletes and other athletes? Can we really create something that isn't just a piece of paper, but is fully supported with exercises? And we're obviously deep into the heart of this, and over the last few months, I think we've now recorded 200 or 225 different exercises that we now have this big library. So I thought it'd be nice today just to catch up with you, look back a little bit on phase one. Many of our athletes have completed the initial 12 or 14 weeks of programming, and now we shift to phase two. So I thought it would be beneficial just to get on and have a quick chat and to look back and then look forward, if that makes sense with you. So hopefully we can get your insight into the program and how we or you have developed this functional strength program.
Okay, so in that first part, looking back at what we built from the beginning, that first 12-week block that we put in was basically knowing what happens to the endurance athletes over the course of a long season. We knew, and especially in this population of athlete, that not all of them are used to being in the gym. So we knew from the start that we were going to have to kind of scale it back and just get people to actually be able to move properly again. So the highest importance in that first 12-week program that we put together was basically relearning how to squat, relearning how to lunge, moving through your hips and not through your knees when we're doing most of these exercises, and then building that in a transitional method so that we can actually progress it to a strength component. So there wasn't a whole lot of strength work in the first part of that program. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we're at this point, where we're going to try and transition some of those. Now we know you can squat without falling over. Now we know you can actually, you know what it's supposed to look like when we do a lunge, or what it's supposed to look like when we do a push-up properly. And we're going to take those same components, we're going to start transitioning it into an actual strength gains as much as we can do from this situation.
And, you know, going back to phase one, a few people were asking, well, the actual reps was sort of dropping as you went through the weeks potentially, and that was obviously because we were increasing load. But even if, so maybe you can just address why the reps were dropping a little bit, and then secondly, talk a little bit about some of the athletes that were more experienced. I think it was important at that phase of the year to really ensure that the movement patterns were correct, because we see so many athletes with poor movement patterns that even though they do a lot of functional strength, aren't necessarily being effective with it. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the things that we did in that first 12 weeks is we broke things down to more basic movements. One of the problems with athletes is that you're able, in a lot of cases, to do a lot of functional movements even if we can't do basic movements properly. So we did hear back from a couple of people that thought maybe this was a little easier than they really thought. And then, you know, I'd have them send me video of them doing an exercise and it wasn't even close to what it should have actually been. You know, in the sense that, you know, if you were doing, for instance, an upper body mobility exercise that had a little bit of a strength component, if you're only getting halfway into the proper position, it's not nearly going to be as challenging as if you're actually all the way in an upright posture, extended thoracic spine, and hands above your head with the elbows all the way back. You know, if you're falling out of those ranges, you know, that was the goal of that first 12 weeks. And when we did some of those descending reps with it, what we were looking at is we were making the assumption that not everybody's going to be able to do all of these things properly from the start. And as we descended the reps in some of the sets, it was, as they get better, it's going to be more challenging for them to do this, or they're going to be able to, instead of doing an assisted pull-up, they're going to do a full pull-up, and so we're not going to be able to do 8, we're going to switch this to 6, but we're really going to concentrate on pulling the shoulders back on the rib cage and not just yanking through the arms during those motions, if that makes sense. Yeah,
no, it certainly does. So now we progress to phase two with the assumption, you know, many people are sort of progressing off of the end of phase one, and with the assumption that we've improved our motor patterns, improved our ability to do the exercise, we shift to phase two. So why don't we talk about phase two, what's the primary focus? What are we trying to get out of the next block? Because it's a big piece of work that we've got coming up. So let's talk about the focus first.
So the focus of this phase, and a large part of the phase that'll follow this, is actually the actual strength gains that we're looking for. So that first part was getting you into the positions to be able to make some strength gains. And a lot of people probably got quite a bit stronger, and that's just from learning how to do the motions, your brain turning back onto the muscles. Now we're actually going to get more into where we're going to ask you to progressively load the muscles so that you're starting with 10 pounds on this, and you're progressing to the equivalent of 50 pounds on that same exercise when we're doing it, later on in the process. So this is more of a traditional strength component that we're looking at this point. Prior, we were looking at just relearning how to move. Both of them get you strength gains. They just go about it in different ways.
Sure. And then, so when we think about the practical nature of this, how many times a week are these guys doing it, and how does the program look like? Because I know that we've separated out mobility and strength a little bit in this program. So why don't you talk about that?
So you're right with that part, because what we don't want to do is have you go into a bunch of strength work and lose all of the mobility gains that we had just worked so hard to get in the first 12 weeks. So what we've done is we built a strength program, which is going to be 2 times a week for most people. And, we need to scale that back. People have to be able to make a decision that, what, I just don't have the experience with it. Once a week is going to be enough for some people. Almost everybody should be able to be fine with twice a week. And then on top of that, we've got a 2 times per week ancillary program that's going to incorporate things like lunges, walking lunges, piriformis stretches, all of those mobility drills that we did in the first part, plus some new stuff that we brought in. And then towards the end of that, some more plyometric stuff that'll actually start to help you take some of the strength gains and transition those into sport-specific movements that'll actually help you produce power while you're running, while you're biking, while you're swimming. And
because that's ultimately, that's obviously ultimately our mission is strength is strength, but unless it's usable strength, it's useless strength. So the ultimate goal, as we think about, and I've been talking to the team about progression throughout the season, and yes, you might be racing. You might even do races in March, April, May, but ultimately our destination in training is that we want to be firing on all cylinders in our sort of race-specific phase. Similar sort of focus or philosophy as it comes to this. Yes, we build strength, but usable power and improvement of that comes on the back of this work we're going to do, really.
Yeah, and you're going to see that stuff phased in more towards the end of this program. So we've got more of a strength block at the beginning, and then you're right, you're absolutely right. If bodybuilders are really strong people, but they're not necessarily very fast. So being strong is not beneficial necessarily in and of itself to being faster, being a better swimmer, being a better biker. We have to do things to transition that strength into the sport that you guys are doing. So you'll see that we're building strength with more traditional strength training stuff, squats, lunges, good mornings, deadlifts, that sort of thing earlier on in the process. And then we're going to get, as we get farther in, you're going to see the medicine ball come in more with dynamic throws and tosses and plyometric push-ups, that sort of thing, because that teaches your body to take the strength gains that you just worked for and use them to produce power dynamically so that you can push yourself against the ground and move forward.
And I think one of the words when you say dynamic, a nice word to add in is maybe synchronization, because that's the important thing, and it really goes back to the very start of doing the exercises correctly, because we're linking many muscles together, and to really improve power, you have to take our strength and in a very synchronized movement, sport-specific synchronized movement, generate power, basically. Do you think that's, maybe leapfrog on that jumbled thought?
It's sort of the idea that there's some core stability work still in this program, and we've mixed it in here and there, things that we know rotational challenges for triathletes is huge. So we put that stuff in there specifically. But when you talk about synchronization, when you do a squat and you put weight on your shoulders and you do a squat, you have more core muscle activity than you do, for instance, when you're laying on your back and you do a crunch. So that component, being able to stand up, lift weights, push them around, jump, land properly, all of those things teaches your body to synchronize and dynamically use every part of your body properly so that and most efficiently so you can move as well as possible. So there won't see a whole lot of isolation exercises in this component. We did a little bit more of that at the beginning because we wanted to make sure that you had baseline strength. Now you're going to see more big body movements, and inside those big body movements you're going to see conceptually it's a little bit different than the way that people have thought about it in the past, but it's in line with what we know about how things work at this point, which is when you're lunging, if you just do a lunge and you put weight on your shoulders, it doesn't have to be onto an unstable surface. Just the fact that you're lunging in line, you have a rotational challenge for your core, you have a frontal plane challenge so you don't fall over to the side. All of those things are teaching your body not only to be stronger, but to be able to use your foot, your ankle, your knee, your hip, and your core all at the same time and keep you from falling over.
Of course, of course. So let's talk about how to be successful, because we have beginners up to even some of my pros, utilizing this. There's some pretty relatively elite athletes, or very elite athletes, I should say, all the way down to people that haven't done functional strength. And then even within the exercises, we've got medicine balls, gym equipment, potentially, bars and things like that. No equipment. We've got the sandbag, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But how are these guys? Because they kind of have to be active participants in the process and make some decisions to really be successful as they go along. So do you want to sort of explain the focus and what it should feel like and how to be successful?
I think the best word that you used there was the active participant component, because in this delivery method, we're giving you the outline, we're giving you the exercises that we need you to do, but we need you to think your way through it a little bit. And there's a huge variability in the delivery to who's actually getting this. And it's not necessarily just the elite athletes versus the people that are just kind of getting into it, because I take care of some of Matt's elite athletes, and some of them don't move very well to begin with. So they're going to have some trouble in some of these things, and it's not necessarily like so. At the end of the day, if we have to progressively move through it, it's not necessarily like a knock that we're not doing it all that well, because some of the best athletes in the world have troubles doing some of these things and doing them properly. So we'd much rather have you do them properly and challenge yourself appropriately. So the way that we built this was that we might have shown this exercise with a medicine ball, or we might have shown it with a bar, and we're going to talk about a sandbag here in a minute, which just gives us a lot of variability with some portability. But what we need you to do is, when the rep set scheme says 2x8, we need you to pick an appropriate weight that will get you to feel like you're actually doing quite a bit of work in that 7th and 8th rep. So the problem for the delivery method is that we didn't want to inundate you with 200 videos is a lot. We didn't want to have 600 videos just showing a difference in here's a medicine ball and here's a bar and here's a sandbag. We need you to think your way through. If you do this with the medicine ball, and you did that 3 weeks ago with a medicine ball, and it wasn't quite as challenging as you thought, then this time through we need to use a bar, or at least try the bar. And if you're using the bar and it's not enough, then we need to use a sandbag. And if you used the sandbag last time, then we need to add a little bit more weight into the sandbag. It's not really hard. You'll get a feel for it. What we want basically is to feel like in that 6 to 8 rep range, which a lot of this component is, that you feel like you've done quite a bit of work, and you just have to choose the implement that gets you there. I think sometimes what happens with some of these athletes is we think that, I'm going to do the hardest one I can possibly do, whether I can do it right or not. And, that goes back to that elite athlete versus the average people. Some of the elite athletes are going to be using the medicine ball with some of these, and some of them are actually doing a struggle just getting into a wall angel position at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, it's not something where you have to absolutely plow through it and do the hardest thing you possibly can. If you don't think you're doing it right, you're going to get much better gains on you choosing the implement that gets you to that 6 to 8 rep range without overloading.
And I guess so. The two components of that that I want to piggyback on a little bit is these should be challenging, very challenging reps 7 to 8, but we're not taking athletes to failure, number one. And secondly, if it's not challenging by 7 to 8, you don't want to therefore do 12 to 15 reps, you do want to increase resistance or load. Fair enough on both of those?
Yeah, and that might mean that the next session that you go back to do, the second session of the week, or the next session the next week, that you grab a little bit more weight, put it in there, and make your decision that way. It doesn't mean that we go back and do this one again, and we definitely don't want you to add, you know, another 8 reps so you feel like, oh, I got a good burn. The point is that 6 to 8 rep range is going to make you stronger. Now, going back to that component where, you know, we did so much work at the beginning that make people move well, that we don't want them to slide backwards by, you know, going outside the realm of the parameters that we're giving them.
Okay. And so let's talk about the sandbag, because this is obviously a funny piece of equipment, and really, I guess to give people some background, we want to avoid forcing athletes to have to go to the gym, because we have a lot of time-starved athletes, logistically challenging to really make space for functional strength as a part of their endurance program. And so this was a good solution, but and this is something from you, John, so why don't you talk about the sandbag and how it can be used and why it's a good piece of equipment.
You know, we were trying to figure out what's the best way to stay as true to a strength component as we can, keeping in mind just the sheer volume of time that you guys spend training, knowing that, you know, realistically for you guys to find an extra 45 minutes to drive to the gym, change, work out there, and come back home might not actually happen for some of you. So these sandbags, they've been around for years. They're used in strongman competitions. They're used in a lot of MMA training right now. But essentially, it's a bag we can buy online, any number of different places. You can Google it. We can give you locations that you can actually buy them as well. And literally, it's a bag that's specially designed to hold sand. We'll fill it with sand. You pick it up at Home Depot. And you can add up to, you know, 110 pounds into one of these bags. Now, some of the guys are already looking at like, well, I'm doing squats with 110 pounds. It's not that hard. Believe me, when you do a front squat with 100 pounds in a sandbag, it's a very different challenge, because it's an awkward weight, and it brings in, you know, that word synchronization. It brings in so much balance challenge and so much body awareness challenge on top of the strength component. You're going to feel like you're doing plenty of work. The beauty of those sandbags is that you can incrementally change the weight as you go through it. And we don't need you to like throw it on a scale and make sure that you added 5 pounds here, 10 pounds there. But you can literally just pour enough sand into the bag, throw it in there, do your reps at 6, and know, okay, that was about right, or you know what, next time I need to add a little bit more and try to figure it out that way. So I think the variability that allows us to, within the realm of what we're doing, is really the best that we can get within it. Now, if you have access to the gym and you are using it at the gym, obviously that's going to give you a better true gauge for where your strength improvements are going. You're not going to know with a sandbag if you've gotten 10% stronger, because now you can squat, you know, 110 pounds versus 100 pounds. But there's still a benefit to the sandbag. Even if you're doing that, still, again, it brings in more of the body awareness component. And I think for most people, as they progress through this and they start to get more comfortable with some of these movements, they're going to find that the sandbag is a happy medium between being able to throw it in your car, take it to the run spot with you, finish your run, go ahead, do your strength component, because that's all you need for it.
And really, this whole program, it still is a pretty efficient workout so far as time. You know, like none of the days should be dominating your life so far as fitting it into your sort of weekly training schedule.
No, and we've done our best to try to make almost all of this be portable, in the sense that if you're meeting in a park and you're going to start your run from a park, that you can still do that strength component day's work right afterwards. You just, again, you need to be an active participant, meaning if there is no step-up bench in the park, then you need to figure out, okay, well, you know what, there is a bench and we can do it off of that, something along those lines. Keeping in mind, this is what we want done, this is a happy medium, and we're getting it done, and it's still within the same philosophy of what we're trying to do.
Sure.
You know, all of those things said, if you have that available and you're able to work your way through it that way, you should be able to do all of this pretty much portable in, you know, sandbag in the back of your truck.
So how about let's look forward. So we had this, let's call it this foundational strength phase that we did, that we could even call it the learning phase, the movement learning phase. Now we've got this strength phase that we are truly pillar strength phase of your whole entire year. Towards the end of it, start to move to synchronized power, as we'll label it there. By the end of this phase, almost everybody will certainly be racing. Some people will be racing some key events, but we will progress to race season, which is a much longer phase. As we look forward to phase 3, what can we expect there? Because we're not going to be having people seeing if they can do more squats with higher weight in that phase, obviously, because the stresses, the demands, and where we're at in the season is different. So why don't we talk about what's coming in the future? Because I think this is key, because this is the part of the year when you start to really start racing. This is where everybody shuts off and just says strength is done, and that global strength is on. So let's talk about phase 3.
This phase that we're in right now should be, by design, kind of the heaviest component that we're going to be looking at. When you look at this program towards the end of it, if you look at the beginning versus the end, you're going to see the next phase more along the lines of what you see at the end of this, and a progression of that. So there's a hybrid towards the end of this of strength components with more, like we said, medicine ball tosses, plyometric push-ups, and those sorts of things. You're going to see less of the pure strength component, more of the power component and dynamic movement and ballistic movements, that sort of thing towards the end of it. And that'll transition into that third phase. Now, you still will have to do, and we want you to do, strength maintenance components, but to do that, it doesn't take nearly as much of the work component that you're going to be doing right now. 2 times a week, we'll probably be looking at, for some people, 2 times a week with a strength component down the road. Some people will only need 1 time a week to be able to maintain that, and the rest of the time can be spent on, you know, getting themselves ready to race, maintaining their bodies so that they don't break down in September and October, November, which is when you guys don't want to be, and then, you know, maintaining those strength gains that you worked so hard for earlier in the season, just holding on to them through the rest of the season.
Yeah, because there's nothing wrong with maintaining strength. What, a couple of final questions, and the first one being, okay, we're in phase 2 right now, and my final 2 questions, one's about phase 2, one's about phase 3. In phase 2, if an athlete is racing, so they're going to go and do, let's say they integrate an early season running race, a 10K or a half marathon, or an early season triathlon where they actually go and do an Olympic distance or half Ironman. They want to do well at it, but it's obviously a stepping stone race to the bigger goals later on. How many days before do we want to sort of make sure that we avoid doing this heavy strength stuff? Do you think? So how many days running, and how much recovery from the races do you think before they load it up again?
Again, that goes back to being that active participant component. Some people are going to know, you know what, I come off of it and feel just fine. And the importance of that race in their schedule is going to be, you know, a 2 versus somebody else it's a 7, even if it's an early season component. So in general, what I do with most of the runners that we'll work with is, you know, if they've got a 2-week session, 2 times a week session, we'll either try to move them Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Thursday, race Saturday, Sunday, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Or if there's somebody that really has a little bit of trouble and we know they're not going to be racing so much early in the season that it's really going to pull away from their strength gains, we'll actually even take that second session out for that week if it seems appropriate for that person. Now, going back to the second program, you'll see that a lot of these programs are built 2 sets of an exercise in week 1, 3 sets of an exercise week 2, 3 sets of an exercise in week 3, and then back to 2 sets of an exercise in week 4. Inside of that, some people will be just fine doing 2 sets, 2 sets, 2 sets, 2 sets, and you're just going to have to kind of feel that out where we know that somebody that has a little bit more of a background in strength training is going to be able to do that. Just like this, somebody that has more of a background in strength training is going to be able to do a hard workout on Friday and go race on Saturday, no problem, or go race on Sunday, no problem. If you're newer to this stuff, I would say you probably want to have the fresh leg feeling. Do it. Try to get your 2 sessions in before Thursday if it's a Saturday, Sunday race. If you've been doing it quite a while, if you've got a background in it, you're probably going to have a pretty good idea. Some people can do it the day before, no problem.
Okay. And just as a slight tangent, but just interest, you go into the third phase of this, you go in and we're popping in, we've got a key event. How much before a key event do you stop the strength work typically? So, you know, does it, again, I know it's a depends, but how much before a key event do you maintain it?
When you get into there's a lot of debate inside of that, but when you get into that kind of competition phase, you have to remember that a lot of the strength component is going to be geared at performance component. So a lot of the stuff will be neuromuscular, like drills and that sort of thing, that are actually going to get you ready to race. So you can go into a race and you can be doing stuff the day before, or you can do the stuff 2 days before. And keeping in mind triathlon's a little bit different, it's especially at the distances that you guys do. But when you get into high-level track and field, you know, a pre-race day often is heavy in drills. It's maybe even some plyometrics and that sort of thing that's going to get you kind of turned on, ready to go for race day. You know, the volume will be relatively low, but some of the intensity of stuff will be a little bit higher, just kind of turning it on. So again, it depends on the person and the individual, but I don't think you're going to have to worry about that nearly as much in the next phase, because this is the work phase. This is where people, if you're going to have heavy legs, it's going to be this part of the season. Nobody really cares how, at the end of the track season, how fast you ran in March. They want to know what you do in the championship seasons or in the race that you were really going after. So you may end up sacrificing a little bit with regard to not feeling great all of the time at this phase, but you're going to benefit from it later on, even with you doing some of the strength component.
Exactly. And maybe that's my final question will be almost a point of clarification. We talked about the third phase. We talked about the shift to power and a lot of neuromuscular work. There's also a stay healthy component to that third phase as well, isn't there, where we do come back and we do put a heavier emphasis on foam roller mobility and almost recuperation, almost emotionally tied up into the functional strength. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, and some of the strength component stuff that will stay in will actually be geared at stay healthy. So high load exercises for a calf and Achilles region just cuts down on the chances of having an Achilles tendon issue flare up, whether you've had one or not. You might not identify that in the program when we put it in, just like you probably didn't identify a lot of those things that were put in the first 12 weeks, but they're going to be in there, and you can get kind of double your money with the strength components with the stuff that we'll be putting in later. They won't necessarily just be for a strength gain. They'll also be geared at, let's make sure that we don't develop hamstring tendinosis, or let's make sure that we don't develop shin splints later on in the season as we're doing. And so some of the strength components will be built with that in mind.
Yeah, especially because obviously the endurance load is the racing load, because people are racing frequently, but also the training load, especially those guys doing half Ironman stuff. It's so high that you have to counterbalance it to really try and keep, because if we can keep the frame healthy, and then we can keep it consistent. If we keep it consistent, they're going to perform well, and that's a huge component. The
biggest thing that endurance athletes have trouble with are soft tissue injuries that develop as a result of low-grade stress over a long period of time. Well, tendons and muscles respond really, really well to higher intensity stress and shorter duration. So, these strength training components, when you're doing a deadlift, when you're doing a good morning and this stuff, and when it stays in later, it actually has a beneficial effect for the tendon with musculus tendinous junction, that region of your body, which actually breaks down a lot more frequently, a lot more commonly in endurance athletes. So a lot of those like self-preservation things are actually built into the strength component as well.
That's great. That's great. So in the coming couple of weeks, I know that you're traveling with your teams, and I know that season's starting for you. You're getting pretty busy now, but like you never are. But in a couple of weeks, we're going to do a Google Hangout with Q&A with some of the athletes themselves. But hopefully this can serve as a good benchmark and platform for everybody to sort of get on the same page, the way that they're approaching this phase 2. So thanks so much. I'll end the broadcast right now and just say thank you very much, John.
Okay, thanks for having me.